Where there's Hi. Why do some people step into more responsibility, bigger roles, larger teams, higher stakes, and feel more energized than they did before, more focused, more like themselves? And then others step into those exact same kinds of roles and slowly start to feel heavier, like they're carrying something that doesn't quite fit. We tend to assume it's about workload. That energy is a function of how much you're doing. But I don't think that's right. I think that's the easy answer. And easy answers tend to hide the more interesting truth. If we haven't met, I'm Chris Quintana. I work one on one with business owners and executives on high performance leadership around clarity, energy, courage, and influence. Today, I'm thinking out loud about where leadership energy actually comes from. Not the surface level stuff, better sleep, fewer meetings, delegate more. Those things matter, but there's something deeper underneath all of that. And if we don't name it, leaders keep solving the wrong problem. So let's get into it. Let's start with what I want to call the adrenaline mistake. A lot of high performers, especially early in their leadership journey, confuse adrenaline with energy. And it's an understandable mistake because they feel almost identical in the moment. Adrenaline shows up when the stakes are high, when there's urgency, when something has to happen. Your focus narrows, your output goes up, you feel sharp, you feel useful. But the thing about adrenaline is it's borrowed. It's your body's emergency response system. It was designed for short bursts, not sustained performance. And when you run on it long enough, you start to notice that you're always chasing that next urgent thing just to feel like you're operating. The urgency stops being a context and starts being a requirement. I've worked with leaders who, when things were calm, they didn't know what to do with themselves. And as a result, they'd create problems just so they'd had something to solve. They'd manufacture pressure, not consciously, but the stillness felt like something was wrong. So they kept the chaos going just to feel alive. Did you know anybody, like when you were in high school or college, that always left their homework till the last minute? That's kind of what I'm talking about, creating pressure. That is adrenaline dependency. And it looks a lot like high performance from the outside. Vitality, though, is different. Vitality is a quieter, steadier signal. It's the feeling of doing work that's actually yours, that draws on what you're genuinely good at, the things you genuinely get excited about, and it moves towards something you actually care about. It doesn't spike and crash, it just accumulates. This distinction matters because the interventions are completely different. If you're running on adrenaline and you try to fix it by taking a vacation, you'll feel worse for the first 3 days and then just recreate the conditions when you get back. But if you understand that the adrenaline is there because your work has drifted from your actual strengths and values, that's a different problem and it has a different solution. So the first question worth asking is, what is actually powering me right now? Sometimes I just can't tell where we're at in these lives. Okay, what is actually powering me right now? So I worked with a client once who, oh my gosh, this person could not sit still. Um, they were constantly looking for more and more and more and more things to do. Their to-do list was so long. They once said to me, it's like I'm never going to be able to finish. And we worked on clearing out that list and delegating things, and they had a little bit more time. And you know what happened? Like a vacuum, they filled it up. Suddenly, instead of just needing to reach out to clients and deal with the current clients and reach out to the prospect list and deal with the people, the leads they'd already talked about, they were doing 1,000 different things to generate leads. They wanted to start working on a book, and they wanted to start working on a podcast, and there were like 1,000 things. Oh, and then there was the family, and like just talking about it was crazy. And so we had a conversation and I said, "Have you ever tried meditating?" And I have never felt such pushback in my life. It was so quick. It was so much. They were absolutely adamant. I cannot meditate. I just can't. And I've actually had a few different people who have told me I can't meditate. Now, I'm okay with different types of meditation. Some people are don't want to sit still and can't sit still. Some people are meditate better by taking a walk in the woods, and those are preferences. And they are preferences. Anybody can teach themselves to sit still. Anybody can learn to be comfortable in stillness. But see, when we're running and we're powered by adrenaline, that stillness is threatening because as your body's going to start going feeling like this because you know there's a thousand other things to do. Um, and I understand why some people don't want to. It's not that you can't. I will stand by this. And I know there are people who are neurodiverse and we all process information differently. Um, and maybe there's a trauma issue going on in the background that needs to get worked through first. But like 97% of the population, I would say, if they were willing and wanted to, they could learn to sit still. But that stillness feels so threatening to some of us they won't even consider 1 minute meditation. Nope. 30-second meditation. Nope. I don't meditate. I've tried it before. I can't. Not going to happen. It's happened in a couple, not just the one I was just talking about, but that one client was the one that pushed back the hardest. And when they realized, whoa, okay, stillness is threatening. It's not that, right? We started looking at that. They started scheduling a little bit more free time for themselves, and suddenly they got a lot more productive. So here's the reframe I want to offer, and I want to be precise about it because I do think it can get misunderstood. Alignment is not about doing less. And it's not about only doing things you enjoy. Oh my goodness. If we only did things we enjoyed, well, I might not be sitting here right now in front of this. I'm getting better. I'm enjoying it more. But sometimes we do things because they need to get done. Alignment is not a soft concept. It is a performance variable. When your role, your decisions, your relationships, and your stated values are all pointing in the same direction, there's very little internal friction. You don't spend energy second guessing. You don't leak energy managing the gap between who you're being at work and who you actually are. You're not maintaining one version of yourself. You're just being yourself. And that is the energy source, that absence of friction. Think about it this way. Imagine you're carrying a backpack, and inside that backpack are all the small misalignments, the decisions that didn't sit right, the values you said mattered but didn't act on, the role you're performing that's a few degrees off from who you actually are. Each one is a small weight, individually manageable, but over time, the cumulative load is significant. And the strange thing is, you stop noticing it's there. You just start thinking, this is what leadership feels like. Heavy, right? Alignment is what takes the weight out of the backpack. And this is why some leaders feel more energized as their scope expands. It's not that they have superhuman capacity for stress, it's that the bigger role actually fits better. The work is more congruent with their strengths. The decisions they're making are the ones they genuinely own. Scope doesn't create energy. Alignment creates energy. Scope just reveals whether it was there or not. Now, I want to be careful not to make this sound too simple because the next question is always, how do you know when you're misaligned? And I think the honest answer is that most leaders already know. They feel it. They just don't trust the signal because the signal is internal and leadership culture tends to reward external metrics. So they keep performing at a high level by external measures while quietly running a deficit that they're not talking about. Now, I want to introduce a distinction that I find incredibly useful in practice, and that's the difference between what I call clean decisions and I can almost say this compensatory effort, right? Where you're compensating. A clean decision is when you can fully stand behind. You have the information you need, or you made peace with the uncertainty that exists. You've weighed the trade offs honestly, and then you commit. Because, and you commit because it's right. Maybe it's easy, maybe it's hard, but it's right, given what you know and what you value. So clean decisions are energizing, even when they're hard. Compensatory effort is what happens when you make a decision or avoid making one that is not quite right. And then you spend energy managing the consequences. You say yes to a project that doesn't make sense, and then you spend months trying to motivate a team that senses it doesn't make sense either. Or you keep someone in a role they've outgrown, and you spend enormous rational energy managing around that reality instead of just naming it. The compensatory effort is often invisible because it looks like leadership. You're still showing up, you're still engaged, but you're spending energy maintaining a situation rather than advancing one. Here's the diagnostic I'd offer. If you feel like you're working harder than the results warrant, harder than the complexity of the situation should actually require, there's probably something compensatory happening. The effort is covering for something that hasn't been decided clearly or said directly or changed when it needed to change. Let me think of an example. Um, Actually, this one comes from me. I'm not even talking about a client. I'm not talking about me. When I ran my school, um, my staff was almost completely made up of students that had grown into adults. Right? My program was mostly kids. They would grow up, and in their early teens, middle school, high school years, they would become a part of my leadership team. They'd start helping me teach, and then eventually they'd get old enough where they got paid. If they had the availability and the interest to be around enough, they could get paid and be paid instructors. Um, and so I knew these kids really well, and we had a lot of different dynamics in our relationships because they grew up with me, because they were the student, but they were also an employee, and there was a lot of switching of hats that went on. And occasionally, I would have issues with how, as an employee, they were performing, but I would have trouble distinguishing the employee from the student because this is my kid. And so there was one time when I really, really needed to talk to one of my instructors because they were underperforming in certain areas. And I kept putting it off. And I got to the point where it was really impacting my energy on the mat. And it was really impacting my attitude towards everybody because I was like bracing myself for the problems. And I was trying so hard to figure out how to manage what I was getting instead of teaching. And so what finally happened was it finally got to the point where, for my sake as well as the students and this employee, I finally sat them down and we did a performance review kind of thing. And I said, these are the issues that I'm seeing. These are the areas of that I think need to be worked on. What are your thoughts? And how can I help? And we made a plan in order to get somewhere. And so the big shift became suddenly, instead of looking at, oh, they did it again. Oh, I need to talk to them. Oh, they did it again. I really need to talk to them. It became, oh, they just did that. Hey, you know that thing we talked about? Let's fix this. And because I finally addressed it, we were able to shift. My energy changed. Their performance improved. It worked out much better for everyone, not just both of us. So clean decisions reduce cognitive load, and they let you move forward instead of constantly recalculating. Over time, the habit of clean decisions, even difficult ones, creates teams that don't require as much maintenance because people know where they stand. Can you imagine that poor kid I wasn't talking to? I wasn't saying I was unhappy with something. I was just acting out. Like, nobody likes that. Nobody wants to work with that. I wouldn't want to work with that. So it was much better all the way around once I came clean and they knew where they stood. They also know what's real, and that clarity is its own form of energy. That's actually why we work on clarity before energy when we go through my program. The leaders that I find most sustainably high performing aren't always the most brilliant. They're the ones who make clean decisions consistently, even when it's uncomfortable. They've learned that short term discomfort is almost always a better investment than long term, here's that word again, compensatory effort. I want to spend a few minutes, it looked good on paper. I like the word, I just don't like saying it. I want to spend a few minutes on what sustainable high performance actually feels like, because I think we have a cultural image problem here. The image we've inherited is intensity, sacrifice, burning bright, pushing through. We celebrate the leader who's always on, who never seems to slow down, who's the first email in your inbox in the morning and the last one at night. And there can be periods of that. There are seasons in any leadership journey where intensity is necessary and appropriate. But we've mistaken a season for a state. And that mistake is costing a lot of leaders their health, their relationships, and eventually their judgment, which is the thing they're actually paid for. Sustainable high performance feels different. It has a groundedness to it, not passivity. You can be highly driven and deeply grounded at the same time. There's a quality of being able to come back to yourself even under pressure. It's a centeredness where you're not going to be entirely swept away by every urgent thing. It feels like having enough margin that you can actually think and not just react. Leaders who are running hot all the time lose their capacity for clear thinking because clear thinking requires a little space. And the irony is they become less effective precisely because they're working so hard to be effective. Sustainable high performance also tends to come with selectivity, not doing everything, doing the right things at the right time with full presence. The leaders I find genuinely energized have gotten clear on what they are uniquely positioned to contribute, and they protect that, not for selfishness, because that's where they can give the most, right? Fine. Imagine like the opposite of this is the solopreneur who finally has a team who has to control everything. Their fingers have to be in every little thing. They were smart enough to hire someone who's better at bookkeeping than them. They were smart enough to hire someone who is better at marketing than them, better at systems than them. They were smart enough to hire people to replace and fill in all the gaps, but they were not. They still want their fingers in everything. And because of that, they're doing too many things. And they're doing all the little things. They're not allowing their team to thrive and to grow. Whereas if they said, okay, I've hired you because I know you're good at this, you're better at it than me, my role is over here. My role is the thing, the service, whatever cogs and wickets that their business is about. That's my role. That's what I excel in. This is my lane. I'm going to stay in it. Everybody goes better. All of that friction goes away because they're not being selfish by saying, no, this is my thing. This is yours. They're being where they can give the most, and they're allowing their team to flourish and be where they can give the most. And so the sustainable high performance also finally comes with the ability to tell the truth about what's actually happening, first to yourself. So when energy drops, instead of just pushing through, you need to ask, what is this signal telling me? Sometimes it's fatigue and the answer is rest. Sometimes it's a misalignment signal. And if you don't learn to read the difference, you'll rest and come back to a situation that still doesn't fit. And then you'll wonder why you still feel so heavy. Here's what I want to leave you with. Energy is not just a physical resource. Energy is not just a physical resource. It's a congruence signal. When your energy is high and stable, there's a good chance you're doing work that fits who you are, making decisions you can stand behind, and operating from something real rather than something performed. When your energy is chronically low or erratic, it's worth asking before you reach for the next productivity hack or the wellness intervention. It's worth asking whether there's an alignment issue underneath. Because no amount of optimization will fully compensate for work that's fundamentally misaligned with who you are. The leaders who get this tend to become exponentially more effective over time because they've stopped leaking energy on decisions that weren't clean, situations that were maintaining rather than changing, and on versions of themselves that were performing rather than living. Clarity is sustainable, noise is not. And that's what this show is about. I hope it was useful today. If this landed with you, share it with a leader in your life who's been running heavy. Sometimes naming the thing is the first step to changing it. I'll see you next time.